checkbox, you want to call this method, or when user tick the radio button, you want to call this method. At that time, the input parameters is going to be different. Like we are calling this method from a radio button, we are calling this method from a checkbox. So from different UI components, we are calling this method we are calling, right? That's why. Okay, so we cannot specify. You cannot We are specifying. That's why we are specifying the input parameter as what? A view object as the input parameter. Okay, if we specify the view object as the input parameter, meaning we can call this method from any UI component, from any UI group. We can call this method because a view object. Because view is the parent for view is the parent of all the UI components. View is a parent for all the UI components and all the UI groups. View object is a parent for all the UI components and all the UI groups are child of view class. View is a parent for all the UI components and all the UI groups. Okay, so that's why rather than passing the child object, we are passing the superclass object we are passing. So that's why you can call this method, you can call from any component, you can call it maybe button, image, text, or text view, it may be anything. You can call this method from any UI component and any UI group you can call because the input parameter for this method is what? It's a view object. All the UI components and UI groups are child of what? View class. Okay. So one thing is done. We configure the click event, we configure through XML, we configure the click event. Whenever user clicks the get text button, we are calling a method we are calling called what? Get text is a method we are calling. Now in this get text method, we have to write the logic here. One second. Now in this get text method, we have to write the logic. And in this get text method, we have to write the logic to get the text from this component, and set the value to this component. So this logic we have to write now. Okay. So where we created this user interface? We created this user interface in an XML file. We created the user interface, right? Where we created this UI? In XML we created this user interface, and we had to write that logic. We had to write in Java. We had to write that logic. In XML file we created the user interface. We created in XML, and now we had to write the logic. We had to write in Java. We had to write that logic. So how will get the data from these components? From this edit text component, and I want to set the data to this label only. For example, in my application, there are a lot of UI components are there like this. Like this, there are a lot of text boxes are there. But when user clicks the get text button, I want to get the text only from this component. Only from this component, I want to set the text. I want to get the text. So how you will configure that one? I want to get the text only from this component. So let's see here. To get the UI component into Java code, definitely you'll get a requirement of XML file. Will create the user interface, but there you cannot configure any events. You cannot configure in XML, right? To get the UI component, in XML, to get the UI component from XML to activity, to get the UI component from XML file to, your activity XML file to activity, Java file. Configure the following attribute to the UI component. Configure the following attribute. Configure the following attribute to the UI component. Configure the following attribute to the UI component. Like for example, if you want to get this edit text component, if you want to get this edit text component, if you want to get into your Java code, we have to configure an ID. We have to configure for this. For example, here I'll configure the ID. I will configure ET1 is ID. I'll configure. Meaning which component you want to get into your Java code. We had to configure the ID for that particular component. We had to configure the ID. For example, ET1 is the ID for this component, and TV1 is the ID I will configure for this text view, like this. So if you want to get any UI component, if you want to get into Java code, to get the UI component from XML to file, XML to activity, configure the following attribute to the UI component. So which attribute you have to configure? ID attribute you have to configure. So Android colon ID is equals to at the rate plus ID forward slash. You can give any name, you can give ID name. So this is a syntax. This is a syntax. At the rate plus ID forward slash is a syntax. Then after that you can give any ID name you can specify. But this is mandatory. First thing is there, right? So at the rate plus ID forward slash. So specify the ID. Okay. So this is mandatory was. At the rate plus ID forward slash is a mandatory. Then after that you can give any name you can give here. After this forward slash. You can give any name you can give after that forward slash. Okay, next. Okay, in the XML file, we had to configure the IDs we had to configure in the XML file to get the component into Java code. So how many components we require into Java code? Only two components we require into our Java code. We require this edit text component we require, and we require this text view component we require. Right? So for these two components, what we'll do is we'll configure the IDs we'll configure for these two components. So here let's configure the ID for this edit text component. Let's configure the ID for this edit text component. Android colon ID is equals to at the rate plus ID forward slash. Give an ID for this component. ET1 is the ID I specified. At the rate plus ID forward slash. Configure the ID of that particular edit text component. What is ID we specified? ET1 is the ID we specified for the edit text component. Okay. Next, after the button creation, we get one more text view component we created, right? We get one more text view component we created. For this text view component also, we'll configure the ID we'll configure. For this text view component also, we are configuring the ID we are configuring. Android colon ID is equals to at the rate plus ID slash. Give an ID for this. I'm giving that TP1 is ID I configured. This is mandatory. At the rate plus ID forward slash is the mandatory. Then after that, you can give any name you can give for your ID. Okay. So we created two components we created in the XML file. One edit text component we created as well as one text view component also we created. Okay. So now here in the activity class in main activity.java, okay, we configure the IDs we configured in the XML file. Next step is to get the UI component from XML to activity. First, we have to configure the IDs we have to configure, and the next step is use the following method. Use the following method to get the UI component. Use the following method to get the UI component. Use the following method. Use the following method to get the UI component from. Use the following method in activity. Use the following method in activity to get the UI component from activity XML. So whatever the UI component we created in the XML, whatever the UI component we created in the XML, we'll get that UI component into our activity file we'll get. So we have to use a method called find view by ID is a method. Which method you have to use? Find view by ID. So find view by ID is a method. We have to specify the ID of that particular component r.id.id name. Okay. So we have to specify the ID of that particular component we have to specify so that you can get the component into our activity file we'll get. Find view by ID r.id. Specify the ID of that particular component so that we'll get the UI component we'll get into Java code. Okay. Okay. So here in our XML file we configured two UI components. We configured the ID we configured for two components. One is edit text component and one more thing is what? Text view. So these two components we had to get into Java code. We had to get these two components. So let's write here in get text. Find view by ID r.id.et1 is one thing. Find view by ID r.id.et1 and another one is what? Find view by ID r.id.tv1. Okay, so get these two components into your activity code. In XML, we configured these two components we created in the XML file. In XML, we created these two components, and by using this find view by ID method, we are getting the components we are getting into activity. We are getting these components. Okay, and here, what kind of component you'll get here? Find view by ID r.id.et1. What kind of component you'll get here? You'll get edit text component. You'll get et1 is equals to find view by ID. Edit text et1 is equals to find view by ID. And next, in the second one, what kind of component we are getting here? Here you are going to get the text view component you are going to get here. Text view 1 is equals to find view by ID. The first one we are getting what? The edit text component we are getting here. The first one. The second thing is we are getting the text view component we are getting from the XML file. Because we know that we configured this ID we configured for edit text. This PV1 is ID we configured for text view. Because we know we configured that, but the compiler don't know, right? Why it is showing this error? Because return type of find view by ID. Return type of find view by ID method is nothing but view object. Then why you are storing into edit text, it is asking. Because by using find view by ID method, you can get any component you can get from the XML file into your activity. You can get any UI component you can get from activity, XML file to what? Your Android activity. That it is asking why you are configuring this ID. I mean, why you are storing this one into edit text you are storing. Just we had to add one statement called typecast. Meaning you had to specify to the compiler was even the return type is view object. View is a parent for this UI component, right? This edit text is a child of what? View object. So we configured this ID we configured for edit text and we configured this ID for text view component we configured. So this concept is called as typecasting. We are converting from one type to another type. So here we are converting the view object we are converting into edit text we are converting. View object we are converting into what? Into edit text we are converting here. Okay. Next, I want to set the text I want to set to text view one component. I want to set the text I want to set to a text view one component. Text view one dot set text. Text view one dot set text. I'm setting the text for text view one component. From where you are getting the text? From et1 I'm getting the text. et1 dot get text dot toString. Edit text of find view by ID and get the text view component, and we are setting the text we are setting for text view component. From where we are getting the text? We are getting the text from edit text one component. We are getting the text. Okay. Now let's run the application and see whether it is working or not. So here the last statement I'm writing here tv1 dot set text, meaning I want to set the text for text view component. I want to set the text. I want to set the text for text view one. This one tv1 dot set text. From where you are getting the text? From edit text. So it's a built-in method. Set text, get text are the built-in methods. I want to set the text for text view one component. From where you are getting the text? From et1 we are getting the text. Okay. So let's run the application. I connected my phone. I connected so through USB. So run the application. So run the app in Samsung. So app is installed. This is what the app we created. Now enter the text here. Now enter the text in this text box. So enter some text I entered in this text box. So I entered what? Some text I entered in the text box. Okay. So once if user clicks the get text button, okay, once if you click the get text button, see we are getting the text we are getting from this component, and we are setting the text we are setting to the label we are setting. Okay. So once if you click any message, okay, if you get any message, and once if you click the get text button, we are getting the text from that component, and we are setting the text we are setting to the label we are setting. Okay. This is our first application, and we configured the click event for a button we configured by using XML. We configured the click event by using XML. We configured the click event we configured. Okay, right? There is one more approach is there. There are two ways to configure the click event. One is by using XML you can configure the click event, and second approach is what? By using Java we can configure the click event. Because always XML configuration will not work. Always XML configuration is not possible. For example, in case of it's a static UI, in case of it's a fixed UI, then you can go with XML configuration. For example, here there are two buttons are there: login and register. You can go with XML configuration. You can go. For example, your data it is getting dynamically. You are creating an application. You are creating. You are getting the data dynamically. You are getting, and you will get a requirement of creating the UI components dynamically. For example, you have a requirement of presenting some thousand items. Thousand items means you cannot configure the methods for thousand methods. You cannot configure in the Java file, right? Correct or not? You're presenting some items. You are presenting list of items. That list of items for presenting the list of items. There is a button called delete button also available. Like this, how many UI components are there? Imagine there are thousand UI components are there, right? Just imagine. So you cannot create this thousand for each and every button. You cannot create one method. You cannot create. Practically, it's very difficult. In one day, I'll get thousand records. In second day, maybe I will get 10,000 records. Or maybe in third day, I'll get only 100 records. Only I'll get. So dynamically, if you are creating the UI components, then this XML configuration is not possible. XML configuration is not possible if you are creating the UI dynamically. In case of it's a static UI, then go with XML configuration. So now we'll see the second approach, how to configure the click event using Java. So if you want to configure the click event using Java, if you want to configure, first whatever the UI component you created in XML, whatever the UI component you created in XML, get that UI component into your Java code. Button is equals to button of find UI ID is a method. Find UI ID is a method. Get the ID of the particular component. R.id dot specify the ID of that particular component. Get the button component into your Java code, and we had to configure the click event. We had to configure for this button. Button dot set on click listener. Button object dot set on click listener. Okay. So here, if you want to configure the click event, you have to configure through Java. There is a method called what? Button object dot set on click listener is a method. For this on click listener, we have to specify the object of. There is a class called view. In this view class, there is an interface called on click listener. There is an interface called what? On click listener. New view dot on click listener. It's an interface, right? It's an interface. On click listener is an interface. This on click listener contains a method called. This on click listener contains a method called on click method. It contains a method called what? On click method. So we had to provide the implementation for on click method. We had to provide the implementation. Public void on click, which is taking the view object as a input. Which is taking the view object as a input. Public void on click, which is taking the view object as a input. So in this on click method, you can write the logic here. What are the logic you want to perform? Logic when button is clicked. Whatever the logic you want to perform when the button is clicked, write that logic in the on click method. Okay, this is programmatic. This is programmatically how to configure the click event. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll remove this XML configuration. In the XML file, we configured this attribute, right? Android colon on click attribute is equals to We specified a method name, we specified called getText. Now I remove this XML configuration, I removed the XML configuration, I removed. So now it will never invoke this getText method because we removed that through XML configuration we removed. So it will never invoke this getText method it will never invoke because we commented that we removed that statement, we removed on click attribute. Okay. Now how to configure the click event using Java. Okay. So now here if you want to configure the click event using Java, there are two methods are there, on create and get text. First, when the screen is started, which method is going to call first? On create, right? By default, when the screen is started, it's going to call on create method is going to call first. This get text method will not call because we removed that XML on click attribute we removed. Okay. So now here in the on create method, after setting the UI, meaning after this set content view statement, in on create method, after setting the UI, meaning after this set content view method, we had to get the button component into our Java code. Had to get. So let's configure the ID for this button component. Let's configure what? An ID for this button component. I configured the ID as B1 is ID I configured. For this button component, I configured the ID I configured. What is ID we configured? B1 is the ID we configured. So first what we had to do is we had to get this button component, we had to get into our activity class, we had to get first. So let's get the button component into your activity file. Button is equals to button. There is a method called find view by ID is a method. What is the method name? Find view by ID is a method. Specify the ID of the particular component r.id.b1. This is the first thing. The XML file we created a button component we created in the XML. In XML we created what? A button component we created in the XML. First, get that button component into your activity file. Get the button component into your activity file. So now for this button component, we had to configure an on-click attribute. We had to configure an on-click attribute. We had to configure for this button. So button dot set on-click listener. There is a method called your button object dot set on-click listener. See what is the input parameter for this method? Input parameter for this method is nothing but object of on-click listener. So simply how we'll create the object by using new operator. We had to create the object for on-click listener. We had to create an object. This on-click listener is a child interface in view. So first you had to specify view class dot. It's a child interface. On-click listener is a child interface. Just click on this on-click listener. That's it. So now here it is showing an error. Error is nothing but I told you that it contains an abstract method. This interface contains an abstract method called on-click method. This interface contains an abstract method called on-click method. We had to provide the implementation for that on-click method. We had to provide the implementation. Let's implement methods. Implement methods. It contains a method called on-click method. It contains a method called what? On-click is a method. So we had to declare this on-click method. We had to declare. Button object dot set on-click listener. Specify the object of on-click listener. So which contains an abstract method called what? Which contains an abstract method called on-click method. So whatever the logic you want to execute when the button is clicked. I'll repeat once again. Whatever the logic you want to execute when the button is clicked, write that logic in this on-click listener method. Write the logic in this on-click listener method. Okay. So now here in this on-click method, so write the logic here. Whatever we are doing here, get the edit text component, and get the text view component and set the text to text view component from edit text. Whatever the logic written here, the same logic will move into this on-click listener method. We will move. The same logic will move into what? Into this on-click method. We'll move the same logic. We'll move the same logic into which method? Into on-click method. We move the logic. We move into on-click method. Okay. Now let's run the application. In Samsung device, I'm installing the application. Okay, SAP is installed. Text again. Okay, some dynamic text, random text again. So click on this get text. We are getting the text from this component, and we are setting the label. We are setting the text. We are setting to label. We are setting. This is Java configuration. This is what Java configuration for a button. So you can use XML configuration or Java configuration. Basically, in case of static, I mean it's a fixed UI component. Then go with the XML configuration. For example, dynamically, if you are creating the buttons on the fly, you will get a requirement of creating the buttons, creating the UI components. At that time, we cannot configure the events using XML. You cannot configure. So we'll configure the events using what? Java will configure the events. We'll configure the events using Java will configure the events. Okay. So this is our first example. Basically, my intention is you have to understand how to provide a how to configure the click event for a button, and how can you get the data from the XML user interface. How can you get the data from the XML user interface to your Android activity? That's what my intention to understand. Okay, you to understand. Okay, so are you clear with this example? Shall we go for second one, the next concept? So next we'll discuss a concept called intense concept. We'll discuss next we'll discuss a concept called what? Intense concept. We'll discuss next one. So one of the most important topic. Basically, intense is used to provide intense is used to provide a communication between intense is used to provide a communication between activity to activity. Intense is used to provide a communication between activity to activity, meaning if you want to navigate from one screen to another screen, intense is used to provide what? A communication between activity to activity, meaning if you want to navigate from one screen to another screen, or if you want to start any background service, if you want to start activity to activity, activity to service, and activity to broadcast receiver, activity to what? Broadcast receiver. We already discussed what is this activity, what is service, and what is broadcast receiver, correct or not? We already discussed these topics, already discussed. Intense is used to provide a communication between activity to activity, meaning from one screen to another screen, or from one screen to any background service, or if you want to call any broadcast receivers, if you want to call, then we use this activity concept we use. Then we use what? Activity concept we use. Sorry, intense concept we use. Meaning, it seems like anchor tag in case of HTML. In HTML, if you want to navigate from one screen to another screen, then what which component you will use? We use a component called anchor tag. That anchor tag will provide you the link for navigating from one screen to another screen. Right here also in Android, if you want to navigate from one screen to another screen, okay, or if you want to start any background service, if you want to start, or if you want to get any system announcements, we use this intense concept to use. Okay, so now still, I mean, we have not started this services part and broadcast receiver. We have not started the services part and broadcast receiver part. We have not started the service and broadcast receiver. We have not started it. So right now we are discussing the activity component. We are discussing right now. We are discussing what? Activity component we are discussing. So let's specify here with respect to activity, there are two types of intents are available. With respect to activity, there are two types of intents are available. With respect to activity, there are two types of intents are available. The two types of intents are, one is implicit intents. With respect to activity, there are two types of intents are available. One is implicit intents, and second thing is explicit intents. With respect to activity, there are two types of intents are available. One is what? Implicit intents and explicit intents. Okay, so we have not started the services and broadcast receiver that we'll call later. We'll discuss that one. Intents with respect to services and intents for broadcast receiver. That concept we'll discuss later. Now we are discussing only the activity part. We are discussing how to create the screens, right? So with respect to activity, there are two types of intents: implicit intents and explicit intents. Let's take the first one. What is the first one? First one is what? Implicit intents. First thing is what? Implicit intents. So basically, purpose of this implicit intents is used to call implicit intents is used to call built-in activities. Implicit intents is used to call built-in activity. If you want to call any built-in activity, if you want to call any built-in activity, if you want to call, then we use this implicit intents concept we use. If you want to call any built-in activities, if you want to call, then we use this implicit intents concept we use. Like built-in activities means, for example, do you want if you want to call a camera, or you want to call a browser, you want to call, or you want to call a caller screen, you want to call, or you want to call setting screen, you want to call. Like already by default with Android, we'll get some built-in screens. We'll get right by default with Android, we'll get some screens. We'll get or not. Leave out third-party applications. By default with Android, you'll get some screens. You'll get by default. So if you want to call any built-in screen, if you want to call any built-in screen like this camera, browser, settings, caller, list of messages. Okay, like if you want, you can call any built-in screen you can call by using a concept called what? Implicit intents. Okay. Now the syntax of calling this implicit intents is syntax of calling this implicit intent is we had to create the object for intent class. We had to create an object. We had to create the object for which class? We had to create the object intent class. We had to create the object intent I is equals to new intent. So we had to create the object for intent class. We had to create the object intent is equals to new intent. So I dot set action is the method. I dot set action is the method. So in this set action method, we had to specify the action name. We had to specify. I mean, which built-in activity if you want, which built-in activity you want to call. We had to specify that activity name. We had to specify. I mean, you want to call the browser or settings. Which screen you want to call? We had to specify that activity name. We had to specify in the set action method. Intent dot set action of intent dot action underscore. Okay, and start activity of intent object. Start activity of what? Start activity of intent object. Okay, so by using this statement, you can call any built-in screen. You can call. Okay, this is the implicit intents. Next, what is the next one? Explicit intents. So implicit intents is used to call the built-in activities like camera, browser, caller settings, and all. The second thing is what? Explicit intents. So explicit intents is used to call user-defined screens. Explicit intents Explicit intents is used to call what? User-defined activities. Explicit intents is used to call user-defined activities. User-defined activities means, for example, you created two screens. You created called login and register. You created two screens. You created called login and register. When user clicks the login button, I want to open the login screen. I want to open. When user clicks the register button, open the registration screen. Like in your application. In your application, if you want to navigate from one user-defined screen to another user-defined screen, then we use this explicit intents concept. Explicit intents concept, which is used to navigate in your application. In your application, if you want to navigate from one user-defined screen to another user-defined screen, then we use this explicit intents concept to use. Okay, let's create the object for intent class. Intent I is equals to new intent. Intent I is equals to new intent is a method. I dot set component is a method. I dot set component is a method. Here we had to specify the object of component name class object had to specify. Here we have to specify the object of what? Component name class object you have to specify. I dot set component, specify the component name class. First parameter specify the context here, and second parameter specify the class name. These are the two parameters we have to specify. First we have to create the object for intent class, we have to create the object. First we have to create the object for intent class, we have to create the object. And I dot set component name is a method. The input parameter for this method is object of component name class is the input parameter. What is the first parameter? Context. We'll see what is the context and which class you want to call. You have to specify the class name, you have to specify here. And finally we have to call start activity of what? Intent object. Start activity of intent. Okay, this is the syntax of calling the explicit intents. This is the syntax of calling what? Explicit intents. If you want to call any user defined screens, if you want to call in your application, then we use this explicit intents concept we use. Okay, next, apart from the user defined screens, meaning apart from user defined screens which is available in your application. Okay, so apart from the user defined screens or user defined activities, apart from the user defined activities, we can invoke third party applications, third party application activities, third party application activities from our application. Apart from the user defined activities, meaning what are the activities you created, apart from those activities, even we can invoke the third party applications also we can invoke. Like for example, whatsapp is not your application, right? So whatsapp, skype, or any third party applications you can call. What are the applications are available in your phone, you can call the third party applications also you can call by using the explicit intents concept. User defined activities, we can invoke third party application activities from our application. The syntax for this one is we had to create the object for intent class, we had to create an object. Intent I is equals to new intent. Sorry, here the syntax will change. Intent I is equals to, there is a method called get package manager is a method. Get package manager dot get launch intent for package is a method name. Get launch intent for package is a method name. So which application you want to call? Get package manager dot get launch intent for package is a method. So we have to specify the package name, we have to specify which application you want to call. Which application you want to call, we have to specify the package name of that particular application, we have to specify. I'll repeat once again. Which application you want to call, you have to specify the package name of that particular application, you have to specify. Okay, get package manager dot get launch intent for package, specify the application package name, and start activity of intent object. Start activity of what? Intent object. Okay, so this is implicit intents and explicit intents. Meaning if you want to call user defined screens from your application or any third party applications, so we use this explicit intents concept we use. Okay, next, apart from this, and following are the major methods. Following are the major methods. Sorry. Following are the major methods in activity class. Following are the major methods in activity class. There are not activity class, intent class. Following are the major methods in the intent class. So one is set action is one method. Set action is one method. Then set data is another method. Set action, set data, set type. Set action, set data, and set type. These are the methods. Apart from these methods, put extra put extra, get extra. Put extra is one method, get extra is another method. Put extra, get extra, and set component. Okay, set component. Okay, these are the some of the major methods. These are some of the major methods in the intent class: set action, set data, set type, put extra, get extra, and what is the next one? Set component. So these are the major methods in the intent class. Okay, so we'll develop a simple application. We will develop a simple application to develop for demonstrating these two types of intents, implicit and explicit intents. And in the example only, we'll try to use these methods. We'll try to use this set action and all these methods. We'll try to use in the application. Okay, so let's create the application. Let's create an application. So here we'll create three buttons. We'll create here in this application. Let's create three buttons. So first we'll create. I'm creating a dial button. I'm creating first dial, next, and WhatsApp. Like this, we'll create what? How many buttons? Three buttons we'll create. One is dial. One more thing I'm creating called next and WhatsApp. Dial. So next, what is the next one? Next. Dial, next, and WhatsApp. Dial, next, and WhatsApp. Okay, so we created what? Three buttons we created. We created three buttons we created. Now we had to configure the click event. We had to configure for these three buttons: this dial button, next button, and WhatsApp. We had to configure the click event. We had to configure for these three buttons. We had to configure the click event. Okay, so dial. We had to create a dial method. We had to create public void dial is a method name. So this application will create. So basically, my requirement is when user clicks the dial button, I want to create three buttons. I want to create like this: dial, next, and WhatsApp. So when user clicks the dial button, my requirement is I want to call the dial screen. I want to call when user clicks the dial button. I want to call what? The dial screen. I want to call. Already Android phone contains what? The dial screen, right? Already Android phone contains a dial screen. My requirement is when user clicks the dial button, I want to call this dial screen. I want to call when user clicks the dial button. When user clicks the dial button, I want to call this dial screen. I want to call when user click the dial button. I want to call this dial screen. I want to call. This is one thing. Next thing is what? Next. When user clicks the next button, when user click the next button, when user click the next button, my requirement is I want to call one more screen. I want to call. When user clicks the next button, when user clicks the next button, I want to call one more screen. I want to call. That is welcome to Durgasoft. So this activity I want to call. It's not a built-in activity, right? This welcome to Durgasoft is not a built-in activity. This welcome to Durgasoft is what? It's not a built-in activity. It's not a built-in activity. I want to call this user-defined screen. I want to call this welcome to Durgasoft activity. I want to call. Here I want to call this built-in activity. I want to call. I want to call this built-in activity. I want to call by using implicit intents. By using implicit intents, I want to call. By using implicit intents, I want to call this I want to call this built-in screen. I want to call. By using implicit intents, I want to call this built-in screen. I want to call. Next, when user clicks this next button, when user clicks the next button, I want to call this welcome screen. I want to call by using explicit intents. By using explicit intents, I want to call this user-defined screen. I want to call. By using explicit intents, I want to call this user-defined screen. I want to call by using the explicit intents. By using explicit intents, I want to call what? The user-defined screen. I want to call by using this explicit intents. Okay. And what is the next one? WhatsApp. So when user clicks the WhatsApp button, When user clicks the WhatsApp button, I want to call the WhatsApp application is there, right? The third party application. So I want to call that WhatsApp application. I want to call from my application by using which intent? Explicit intent. By using explicit intents, I want to call this WhatsApp. When user clicks the WhatsApp button, I want to call the WhatsApp application. I want to call. So by using what? By using explicit intents. So by using explicit intents, I want to call that WhatsApp application. I want to call by using the explicit intents. Okay, this is a requirement. This is what the requirement. So we'll see how to call the built-in activities and how to call the user-defined screens and how to call the third-party applications. And parallelly, we'll try to use these methods. I mean, these there are six major methods are there, right? In the intent class, there are six major methods are there, and we'll try to use all the six methods in this example. In this example, we'll try to use all the six methods. Okay. So first, create the project. Let's create a project. So file, new, a new project. Specify the project name here. Let's take my project name is Intents EX is a project name or Intents Test is a project name. I'm creating a project called Intents Test is a project name. Next. Okay, next. And here take an empty activity. Take what? An empty activity. Click on this next button and finish. So project is created. First open the XML file. In resource, layout, open this XML file, activity underscore main.xml. Let's open the XML file. So first in this XML file, we'll specify the main UI group. We'll specify in place of relative layout, we'll specify the main UI group as what? Table layout we specified. We specified the main UI group in place of relative layout to what? Linear layout, not table layout, linear layout. Yeah. So we don't require this tools attribute, we don't require. You can remove the tools attribute. Width and height we specify as match parent and match parent. Remaining all these attributes, you can remove all these attributes. And here we had to specify orientation attribute. We had to specify orientation is equals to vertical. I specified the orientation. Okay. So now inside this linear layout, total we had to create how many button components we had to create? Total we had to create three button components we had to create, right? So one is dial, next, and WhatsApp. So I want to create three buttons I want to create, and I want to configure the click event also. I want to configure for the three buttons. Okay, let's configure. Let's create three buttons here first in the XML button, match parent, wrap content, and what is the text? What is the text you want to display on button? I want to display the text as what? Dial is the text I want to display. This is one thing, and I want to create one more button called next. Dial. Next, what is another one? Next, and I want to create one more button called WhatsApp. WhatsApp. Okay, so we created three buttons. We created three buttons. We created dial, next, and WhatsApp. We created three buttons. We created, and now we had to configure the click event. We had to configure for these three buttons. Dial, next, and WhatsApp. We created three buttons. We created. Now we had to configure the click event. We had to configure for all these three buttons. On click is equals to dial. On click is equals to dial. On click is equals to next. On click is equals to dial. On click is equals to next. And on click is equals to what? WhatsApp. So we created three buttons. We created three buttons. We created, and even we configured the click event also. We configured. On click is equals to dial. On click is equals to next, and on click is equals to what? WhatsApp. So these three methods, this dial, next, and WhatsApp, these three methods we had to create in the activity class. We had to create the three methods, the dial, next, and WhatsApp. Public void. One is dial, which is taking the view object as an input. So dial, next, dial, next, and WhatsApp. Okay, so these three methods you had to create in the activity class. You had to create these three methods: dial, next, and WhatsApp. So here, okay, we configured three buttons we created, and we configured the click event we configured. Now what is the requirement? When user clicks the dial button, when user clicks what? When user clicks the dial button, I want to call the built-in dial screen. I want to call already Android contains a built-in dial screen. So I want to call that built-in dial screen. I want to call when user clicks the dial button. When user clicks the dial button, I want to call that built-in dial screen. I want to call when user clicks the dial button. Okay. So here, whenever user clicks this dial button, it's going to call that method. It's going to call when user clicks the dial button in activity class. It's going to call this dial method is going to call in the activity class. Dial method will be called in the activity class. In this dial method, first create the object for intent class. Create the object for which class? Intent class will create the object. Intent I is equals to new intent. In dial method, first we had to create the object for what? Intent class we had to create the object. Intent class we had to create the object, and next I dot set action is a method. I dot set action is a method. We had to specify the activity name. We had to specify. For example, I want to call that dial activity. I want to call intent dot set action. Intent dot action underscore dial. I want to call the dial screen. I want to call. That's why I specified. Intent object dot set action. Intent dot action underscore dial. I want to call the dial screen. I want to call. So that's what we specified. Intent dot set action. Intent dot action underscore dial. I want to call the dial screen. I want to call. Next, start activity of start activity of intent object. See, once if you specify here intent object dot, you will get a lot of built-in activities. You will get lot of activities, services, and broadcast receivers. Intent dot set action, intent dot. Here you will get lot of. You can find lot of activities, services, and broadcast receivers. You can find here because intent is used for providing communication between activity, service, as well as broadcast receiver. See how many activities, services, and broadcast receivers are there. Okay. Here we are selecting action underscore dial. We are selecting because this statement action underscore dial, which is used to call the dialer activity. Okay, so we'll test the application. Let's see whether it is navigating to the dial screen or not. Just run the application. We're still loading the app. We'll wait for a few minutes. Okay, so app is installed. App is installed. So when you click the dial button, it will navigate to dial screen. It will navigate. So I'm selecting this dial button. I'm selecting. It is navigated to what? The dial screen is navigated. Okay. It's a built-in screen in Android. It's a built-in screen in Android. This dial screen is a built-in screen in Android. So by using implicit intents, we are navigating to this dial screen. The built-in screen we are navigating by using the implicit intents. So whenever user clicks the dial button, we are navigating to the built-in screen. We are navigating. We're navigating to built-in screen. We are navigating by using what? By using implicit intents, we are navigating to the screen. We are navigating. Okay, so this is a implicit intents. Like this, you can call any built-in activity. You can call browser, you can call camera, you can call settings, you can call any built-in activity. You can call by using the implicit intents concept. By using what? Implicit intents concept. Okay, let's work on up to this. Okay, and in the tomorrow class we'll continue, and we'll continue this. We'll try to complete this example, and we'll try to use all these six methods in our application. Okay, and if anyone is not started still practicing the applications, just please install Android Studio and start working with the the examples whatever we are discussing every day, because day by day complexity is going to be increased, boss. Whatever the code I'm writing here, the day by day the code complexity is going to be increased. Okay, so if you practice, then only you can understand. The further class you can understand, otherwise it's very difficult. Okay, it's okay. Any question, any
Mahesh,
question? Yeah.
Mahesh, can you please send me these notes, the Android 6am notes?
Okay, I'll place in the same drive folder I place. Actually, I'm planning to create a drive folder for your batch, because every day I'm recording the sessions.